Steve, are you there?
I wish the listeners could see your face,
Steve,
man.
Are you there? Steve,
I am here.
It's like I'm summoning you out of the darkness, out of the spirit realm.
Come towards the light.
Yeah,
Come towards the light.
Steve,
Oh.
speak to me, Steve. Steve, if you can hear my voice, speak to me. Let us know you're here.
Rap on the table 3 times.
Yeah, exactly, Steve. Please, are you there? Crack your toes so I can hear you, Steve. Welcome to Chinwag, everybody.
We are working our planchettes over here, people.
Nice, I like that. Planchettes. That's the thing in the Ouija board, right?
Yes.
That's the thing that goes around. I just was reading actually a really interesting book about there was a whole crazy POW escape in the First World War, British soldiers escaping from a Turkish prison in central Turkey. They'd been taken prisoner in the First World War, these guys, being held in this remote sort of mountain prison. And they escaped. And the principal way in which they escaped was just for entertainment's sake, to pass time, they had made themselves a Ouija board.
Really?
Out of yeah. And it caught the attention of the guards and the Turkish command. And they began to realize that they were pulling these guys into this sort of world of spiritual world. And they started messing with them. And then they started telling these guys that, there's apparently some sort of treasure buried outside the prison. And the spirit guides tell us that. And they convinced these Turkish soldiers.
Really? This is real?
Yeah. And they effected this escape.
It's fantastic.
By faking them. Isn't that great? By faking them out with a Ouija board.
That is genius.
It's genius. It's really, really ingenious. And there's something
Best use of a Ouija board ever.
Yes, it's amazing. And it's like, and they basically got these guys to kind of just let them out and then under guard. And then they escaped. Then actually the really perilous, hazardous part of it started because they had to get through the mountains and all this stuff. But they survived, a bunch of these guys.
God, that should be a movie, man.
It should be a movie. Yeah. It's a really good book.
You should be in it and play the main character.
Oh, no, I'll play the idiot, commandant of the camp.
Who goes searching for the treasure.
Yeah, I'll play the guy who's really like, maybe there's
Colonel
something
Clink.
to this. Yeah, the Colonel Clink. Exactly. Oh, dear. Well, here we are at the Chinwag, indeed. And today is gonna have something to do with the spirit realm. Our guest today will be taking us
She's an expert in many things, including the spiritual, life after death. She's a great journalist.
Before we get to that, who she is, again, thanks for listening, as always.
Yeah.
Listen to us on Spotify and rate and review on Apple Podcasts, etc.
It takes a lot of work for our team here at the Chinwag to find these strange experts that we know our listeners like. And so hats off to our team, but also get on down and give us a good review and ranking, please.
Yes. Our incredible guest today, Steve, this woman actually contacted us because she had a very strong, vivid reaction to our episode with Lisa Morton about sort of seances in the history of spiritualism. Yes. And we've been wanting to have her on the show, but lo and behold, she came to us because she took issue with some of what she heard.
She took umbrage.
Lisa Morton, because Lisa is a strict skeptic about this stuff, and this woman is a bit more credulous about it. Yeah. And in fact, her big beef was about ectoplasm. Which, if you'll remember, can you define ectoplasm for the listeners before we?
Of course, a listener should go back and listen to that episode because it's a great episode with Lisa Morton. But yeah, ectoplasm is a kind of spiritual substance that the medium is able to eject out of their orifices, usually the nose, the mouth, or the belly button.
Yep. Sure.
And it's sort of like a cloud or vaporous spirit. And would you say that it helps the medium, like it's a kind of spiritual energy, and then does it open the channel to the other world or something?
I think that's right. I think it does. Okay. It's not entirely clear to me, but yes, I think that's right. And there's a lot of famous photographs of mediums from the 19th century and early 20th century manifesting this stuff, and it looks like this kind of globby white stuff
like
coming out of
snot. Honestly, it looks like phlegm or
like a serious like catarrh, I think is the word. The catarrh, the flow of mucus. And I think that's the word. And it does, and it's kind of coming out of their mouths and coming out of their noses. It's a very peculiar thing, and I've always found it to be one of the weirder aspects of sort of spiritualism.
And you're not entirely on board, I believe.
I'm not entirely on board about it. And I would say that you are too, Steve.
I am also not entirely convinced.
But
yes,
this amazing woman, Leslie Kean is her name.
Yeah.
She claims to have actually witnessed manifestations, physical manifestations of a medium, including ectoplasm. So we're very excited to have her on the show. She is an acclaimed investigative journalist. She spent over 2 decades researching and reporting on UFOs. She's the author of 2 incredible books, Surviving Death, A Journalist Investigates Evidence for an Afterlife, in which she touches on the stuff we're about to talk to her now. It was also made into an amazing Netflix series. And UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, which was a New York Times bestseller and is a really, really excellent real basic good text about sort of more recent sort of developments in sort of the UFO world. But we are here to speak with her about her experiences with ectoplasm. We're thrilled to talk about this because this is some far out stuff.
Even for the Chinwag.
Even for the Chinwag. We are thrilled to have her here on the Chinwag. Please welcome Leslie Kean.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome, Leslie.
Nice to meet you guys.
Hi, Leslie Kean. How are you?
Welcome to the Chinwag.
I'm so happy to be on your show. What a thrill.
We're really excited to have you on the show. That's awesome.
Well, we're fans of your work, too. Big fans of your work.
Yeah.
Thank you
really
so
great
much.
Admirers.
Well,
absolutely.
I've been doing this a long time, so.
Yeah. And I'd like to know some of the origins of some of your interests.
Whatever you want to know, I'll do my best. So it's a question of whether you want to do the weirder stuff first, and then we can sit back and go, oh, something really easy and physical, like UFOs. Yeah, like UFOs.
Piece of cake.
That's a cakewalk.
Exactly. That's how I see it. It's completely like mundane. It's mundane by comparison.
Yes, it is.
You've been in the field too long.
But I think you're right. I personally can sort of sort my feelings out a little bit more clearly about the UFOs than I can about the spirit, or paranormal stuff, or the supernatural stuff.
Well,
it's a little bit trickier.
There's physical data on UFOs. It's a physical phenomenon. Our government's involved. It's like, it's no longer questionable whether they're real. And that's just a different universe from this ectoplasmic stuff.
Paul and I were kind of like hearing the stories about ectoplasm, and it was sort of the fraud versions, but we understand that you find it more compelling, and we really want to hear like what your views are. I mean, Paul, step in here if I'm...
No. I mean,
I'd love to hear your take on ectoplasm.
We've been talking to Lisa Morton, and I don't know. Were you familiar with her before, Leslie?
Actually, I wasn't, but I did listen to the podcast.
She's great.
Yeah,
she's an historian essentially of a lot of different things and kind of these sort of traditions. She wrote a great book about sort of Halloween, and she wrote a great sort of cultural history of ghosts. And she wrote this sort of, and zombies, and then this book about sort of this sort of history of spiritualism. I was surprised, because I knew her very little, I was surprised to find that she's a hardcore skeptic. I thought that spending all of her time researching this stuff, she might actually buy some of it, but she doesn't buy any of it. But she talked about this sort of physical mediumship and then the sort of history of it, and then physical mediumship being people who could levitate and ectoplasm and things like that. First of all, did you start out as a skeptic about this stuff and become less skeptical?
You mean specifically about the physical mediumship stuff, the ectoplasm stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have to say I was kind of neutral. I mean, so when I first heard about it, I was completely fascinated by it because I thought, if this could be real, like I want to experience it. I want to know about it. So I didn't have any particular opinion. I just thought, I really do want to find out. Because I'd like to be in the room when these things happen. And that was like many, many years ago when it first sort of came into my universe.
I think I was amazed to hear that people are even still manifesting ectoplasm and things like that. To me, it seems like something that's so a relic of the late 19th century, the early 20th century. I mean, it seems so debunked that I was amazed to know that anybody was still even doing it, or that there were even sort of physical mediums really at all anymore.
Well, can you tell us about your experience with it? Like what actually happened to you when you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, those are huge questions. Just to comment on what you just said, Paul, I mean, I'm sure there are fewer people doing it now, but they've also gone underground. There's so much stigma about it that, like you're saying, that everybody just thinks it's completely nuts.
Yeah, Paul's bringing it out at people.
Yeah. That, you go on Wikipedia and you can, I was just doing this last night. I mean, it was so interesting to me, because it was one of the references that your guest made. Again,
Lisa Morton.
Lisa made, was to this medium that, everybody just, if you go on Wikipedia, they just write it up as if it's a fact that she was a fraud. And it's absolutely not the case. Oh. And I can tell you how we know if you want.
Sure. Sure. And which medium is this?
Well, her name is Eva C. That's sort of what she goes by, Eva Carrière. She was a young French woman. And the thing about someone like that is you have to go back to the original scholarly texts, which I have many of in my bookshelf, and most people don't even know exist, by these scientists who in that day went in and studied these mediums. And in her case, there were there's at least 12 people who were named who performed controlled experiments on her. They observed the ectoplasm. They documented it in photographs. They all saw the same things in different locations. These were scientists who had already exposed lots of fraudulent mediums. So they knew what to look for. They knew it's not that hard to control a situation, to eliminate the possibility of fraud. And I can tell you how to do that.
Please, absolutely.
I mean, it was done with this woman, and there are volumes of scholarly documents by the leading scientists of the day who prove it, basically. And so, and it's so hard for people to accept that it's real, but you also can't get that unless you do your homework. Because it's sort of obscure, these documents. I mean, these books. I mean, look, here's one of them. This is look at the size of this thing, 1927. But it's all there. It's all there, and multiple other books too. And the way they lay it out is just impossible to dismiss it as fraud.
Now that's interesting just in itself, because 1927, I didn't think it was still a phenomenon that was being manifested by 1927. For some reason, in my mind, I think this is there's like this short period of time where that happens, and then it's debunked, and these sort of charlatans give up the idea of doing this anymore because it's so patently false. But
the book was in 27. I think the studies were done maybe 10 years earlier in the teens, but that was sort of the heyday, in the 19-teens, the 1920s, when a lot of these studies were done.
Do we know what the controlled experiment or these controlled experiments were like?
Yeah, what were the controls?
Well, yeah. So the scientist named Gillet, who wrote that big thick book, he took, her name was Eva C. He took her into his own lab. So he had complete control of the space. It was locked all day, and it was locked when they were in there. They took all her clothes off, literally. She was completely stripped naked. They checked her hair, her mouth, even her private parts.
Oh boy.
They put her in a sewn garment so that she couldn't do anything to get out of it. And then as soon as she's in that garment, the investigators would take her hands and they walked her backwards into the room, and they never let go of her hands during the whole time. And also the lights were on so they could see what was going on. I mean, a lot of seances are done in the dark, but in these studies with her, she just had this, for some reason, this incredible amount of ectoplasm. It's just something bizarre. And they photographed it, and they observed it in those kind of conditions where it was just impossible for her to fake it.
Does it go out into the room? I'm sorry. And it goes out into the room, and then she retracts it back in? Is that how it worked? Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
they didn't save samples and analyze the samples.
When you take a sample into a little vial, it basically disintegrates, and you go into the lab, and it just turns out to be like some cells from inside the medium's mouth, because that's where it comes from. But you can't take this substance because it's sort of like, no one understands what it's even composed of. It's like energy and matter kind of combined. I know it's incredibly hard to read. But what I love is when I read these documents written in this eloquent language, and I've experienced it myself, and they're all saying the same things. They're describing what I've actually experienced and seen. And we don't know anything more about it now than we did back in the, 100 years ago.
First of all, I don't think I realized it was weightless in some way, that it was floating. I mean, I can see in some of the pictures, but of course I'm assuming somebody's got it hooked onto something. But it's almost impalpable, like some kind of fog or something.
Foamy.
You're telling me. Oh, interesting.
Well, what's interesting, Paul, is it's amorphous. So it can take It can be as like a mist, like you just said. It can be like a spider-webby kind of thing. And it can be like a solid rod that can move heavy objects around a room. So it can change form. I mean, I don't know how this happens, but it does. It can change it can become soft, hard, gas, whatever.
I'm more of the skeptic of the group here, I think, but
Believe it or not, he is more. I mean, because it's like usually I'm more willing to go, but this one for some reason always been tough. Sorry, Steve. Keep going.
But no, I still want to be open-minded about it too. And I'm just, I guess like when I hear about the study you were talking about from the 20s, and I love William James, and William James went to a medium and was very convinced by it. And I consider James to be a very smart person. He had also just like lost his son. I mean, he was in a grieving sort of condition.
Right.
I don't want to be reductionistic, but I look for ways in which people could be making more out of it than is actually there. So that's why I really want to hear what your own experience with ectoplasm was like, because it's out of the books then and out of the literature and really your own experience.
To know that that's happening now and that you've seen it, I'm dying to know what the circumstances were.
I know. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated in doing all the research on it. And they all corroborate each other. But and I totally get your skepticism, Stephen. I mean, this is the most bizarre thing I've ever run across.
Yeah.
And it really is. And I can totally get it. I just don't like it when people debunk it when they don't know anything about it, when they haven't done their homework. That's just not fair.
Please tell us about the actual experience you had. Who this person is who does it, where you saw them, all of it. Give us the whole schmagegi.
Okay, and if I get too rambling, just interrupt me.
Not possible.
Questions.
Not possible on this podcast.
Okay.
Not possible.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the man's name is Stuart Alexander, and he lives in northern England.
Ah.
He's a physical medium he's in his 70s now. He's been doing this since he was in his 20s, so about 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a whole history of him having been tested and all these different locations and with different people and being tied and all these things.
Do we know, is this something that he sort of could do as a kid, the ectoplasm thing?
The way it started was he got really interested in, he read a book that really fascinated him in this, just out of the blue. And he just decided it'd be fun to sit and see what would happen. He just started sitting in a dark room with some friends because he just wanted to see if anything would happen, never expecting that he had any abilities at all. And then eventually over time, things just started to happen that happened to him, as obviously he was the facilitator of things that were happening. So he just sort of let it all unfold. And I don't think the ectoplasm part came for a while. I mean, that's not all there is to this kind of mediumship.
Right.
There's a lot of other things that happen. And he believes that a lot of the other stuff is just as important, if not more so, in terms of evidence. So his approach is that the only reason to do this and the only purpose of it is to show that we survive death. And so it can be argued that that's not what it means. It could be argued that, there are these phenomena that happen in the room, but maybe they're just generated by humans.
That never really occurred to me. How is this a proof of life after death? I mean, in what way is it proof of life after death? It never occurred to me before.
Could be something else.
What exactly is it proof of? Yeah.
That's the bottom line question. It's not whether the phenomena occur. It's what do they mean? And the mediums themselves believe that spirits from the other side are working through them to make these things happen. And, when I'm sitting in that room, it's very easy to feel that that's what's happening. I mean, so what happens is with Stuart, he goes, and this is again after decades and decades, I checking out the room, making sure it's authentic. We don't have to go into all of that. It's kind of boring. You just have to trust that I'm not going to be fooled by something like this. And he's been tested throughout the decades, and so when what happens is you go and you sit in a little circle. There's maybe 7 or 8 people at the most. And he has this chair that he sits in, and he goes into a trance state, which means he's completely unconscious throughout. He doesn't even know what's happening. He just disappears. And what happens is and I'll just tell you from their perspective what's happening, as if you can interpret it however you want. These spirit entities who are like his spirit team, there are like 5 of them who have been doing this for decades with him. So what happens is one at a time, they will come into his body and use his vocal cords to speak. So he'll go into this trance, and then you'll hear let's say the first one that usually comes in is a little boy named Christopher. So suddenly you hear this voice speaking through Stuart's body of this completely different person.
Mhm.
And he'll do his thing in the room, and then he'll go and somebody else will come in. There's like 5, then they all have different roles to play in the seance. And so, the way it's presented, as far as they're presenting themselves, they are beings who used to live on Earth and now they're in the spirit world or the afterlife.
Mhm.
And they're working through Stuart to try to show people that we survived death.
That's interesting.
So that's sort of where that element comes in. I mean, that's how they describe it. And
these are kind of 5 guides that he's become acquainted with over time. That's sort of
exactly.
and they help him make contact with say I come in there, want to talk to my father. These 5 or one of these 5 or combination thereof will be able to make contact with my father. Is that part of the idea in a seance with him like this?
If you're lucky, you can get in contact with your father. But you're right. There's one guide. Her name's Frida, and her job is to do that, is to connect people with their loved ones.
Okay.
And that happens a lot. If you were to visit and come sit in the seance, which maybe you will someday.
Let's do it.
Believe me, it's
Yeah.
it's extremely. I'm eager to do. I've never done one, but this sounds pretty good.
I might be able to make that happen for you guys.
Okay.
That'd be awesome.
If they will want to connect you with someone who has passed, but there's no guarantees. You can't go in and say, I want to talk to my father, dial him up, It just depends on what comes through and what happens and all the factors involved, which I don't completely understand. So anyway, you get these voices and then you can hear the ectoplasm. So there's one guy named Walter who's responsible for the physical phenomena in the room. And that's where the ectoplasm comes in. And you can hear this sort of gurgling sound with Stuart. You can hear that the ectoplasm's there. And then there's certain what they call experiments that they do, which you kind of repeatedly. They have like a repertoire which use the ectoplasm, and these things happen in the room. And some of them are in the dark, some of them are in the light. Some of them are with objects that are illuminated, so you can see the objects move around.
But you're able to see him the whole time, or it's completely pitch black, and he's sitting at the table with you. He's not in a kind of like curtained off thing or something. He's like sitting there with you, and you can see him.
Right. Well, a lot of it's in the dark.
Okay.
And he's not in a cabinet, which is a closed off thing. And there's no table. There's a small table in front of him, but it's not like the whole thing is happening around a table. So what happens is he's strapped into his chair. His wrists are with cable ties, and these cable ties, I went and bought them myself and made sure there's no tricks. They're around the smallest part of his wrist so he can't slide out. And then he has illuminated pads on his knees. So if he were to move, you can always see those knee pads. You can always know that he's there. It's a small room. The voice is right there. If he were to get up, you'd know. It's just impossible that you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And that's when it's in the dark. But some of this stuff goes on with the light on.
Okay.
And one of the more interesting things, the trumpets that levitate, which is a trumpet, is a kind of traditional thing in mediumship.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've heard that. Yeah.
And what does that mean? What are you actually seeing when you see?
Why the trumpet?
Yeah, and why trumpets? And it's
like a cone-shaped thing about, with a wider end and then a narrow, like a megaphone type thing.
Yeah.
Maybe about that long, about a foot long. I don't know. I think it's used sometimes in mediumship to amplify voices that want to speak. That's another component of all this, which was not in the studies I've studied, like Eva C. and some of the others from the 1920s say there weren't, I don't know if voices were part of it, but independent. Voices that are speaking in other parts of the room, not through Stuart. And that's one of the more amazing things.
But the trumpet appears as this sort of glowing object in the dark. Is that what you're seeing?
I'll explain that too. Yeah. So what
Please.
happens is they have a lit up area. And it's like a luminous, you can put it against a light and then it's lit up. And it's around the wider opening of the trumpet. So what happens is the trumpets go on the floor. There's 2 of them. They go in front of Stuart. And then usually we sing a little bit. They say, let's sing a little bit to get the energy going in the room. We sing a little bit. And then one of them starts banging up and down on the floor. You can hear it. And then you see it right. What you see is that ring in the front that's lit up. And you see it rise up. And then it just goes all over the room, up to the ceiling, fast, slow. And it goes around and touches people in the dark.
Is a sound coming out of it at this time or no sound?
Well, no, normally no, but there have been times where it has. And that was one of the freakiest experiences I've ever had, was hearing that sound.
Was a sound coming out of it?
Very freaky. It was like suspended right in front of me, because it can just stop in midair. It can do whatever it wants, because this is the ectoplasmic rod that's moving it around.
Oh my God.
I know, it's like,
I'm just like, what?
I know.
Wait a minute.
Yeah,
Hold on. I think I've misunderstood something about the trumpet thing, essentially.
Okay.
He has a kind of pre-existing prop that is one of these trumpets, you're telling me.
It's
and
in
he
the
puts
room,
it in front of him. I see. And he puts it in front of himself. It's a thing. Okay. I thought it was a thing that suddenly manifests and moves around and then disappears. It's an object that he's providing and saying, here's my trumpet. And hopefully one of these spirit guides will manifest some way that it will move around the room and do these things. It will touch people. It might make a sound. It will glow in some way. How weird. How strange.
It's his thing. It's the same trumpet he's had for decades. And it's just in the room all the time, sitting on this little table. And the
where do you get your spirit trumpets from? Like, do you buy them?
You can make one.
The Gilded Age store.
You make one.
You can make it. I actually made a small one once, and I brought it over with me, hoping that they might play with it. But you can easily make them. It's just black.
You just make it.
Just dark tape, and then with an opening with this illuminated.
That's all it is. Okay, interesting.
And you can inspect it. You see it all over, and it'll also go bang on the ceiling. It's not like there's any human in the room that could make this thing do what it does. The other thing it does this is in the pitch dark. It'll carefully touch it's done this with me. It'll touch my forehead, then my cheek, and over here. Never touching my glasses, maybe touch someone's nose, as if it can see in the dark.
In the dark, that's interesting.
Or it'll just tap you on the top of the head, and sometimes it'll be responsive if you say something. Like you might say something, and then it'll nod, like a yes.
You can see it doing that.
Or you'll say, "Can you go over and do this?" and it'll do it. Because there's an intelligence behind it. This is the thing about it. It's not just ectoplasm just kind of comes gushing out and it's the stuff. There's an intelligence that's operating this thing.
It's moving this stuff around. It's not just a display. Yeah. I see.
So you're saying the ectoplasm actually moves a lot of this stuff.
Exactly. Okay. And I didn't know that for a while. I thought I was just seeing this invisible thing levitating, but it's attached to Stuart's abdomen. That's where the ectoplasm has come out of his abdomen, and the spirit named Walter is in Stuart's body. I think he talks during the trumpet. And so the ectoplasmic rod comes out of his abdomen, and sometimes they will take him out of trance during the trumpets. So he can see them himself. And he'll talk about how uncomfortable it is, how it's kind of painful for him in his abdomen, which is where all the ectoplasm is coming out.
It's like coming out of his navel, or it's coming out of his, we don't know. It's just coming out of his...
Mostly it comes out of his mouth. I know how it's the weirdest thing
and
in the world.
You've seen this stuff come out of his mouth. You've seen the actual material.
No, I haven't. I have not. I've seen pictures of it. He'd have some pictures taken once.
So the pictures are taken...
I've seen those pictures, but Stuart is really... sensitive. He would never want anyone to see those pictures. He doesn't want scientists coming in his room. He doesn't want to go through the hell that the mediums went through in history. He just wants to sit every week with his group.
How do you overcome, when I hear this, it sounds awesome and I would love to do it.
Yes.
But I also can't help but think of just the great magicians that we all know. And I just think, is this a magic act that... And I don't want to be insulting about this, but you can't help but think maybe this is just a really good magic.
And for me, a lot of when you read about, one of the interesting things in reading about the sort of history of spiritualism in the 19th century is the kind of rise of it, along with a lot of kind of stage magic and things going on at the same time.
Right.
That there's an interesting sort of correspondence between the two, that they're kind of happening at the same time. And the sort of technological stuff that's allowing people to do stuff in stage magic and things like that. I mean, I think of things like, wasn't Houdini able to swallow and regurgitate at will certain things, certain objects? Couldn't he swallow keys and that he could regurgitate them in different? I mean, I don't know how true a lot of that stuff is. That could all be legendary too. I don't know.
No, I think a lot of that's true. He could do that kind of stuff.
So I hear that and go, could this guy just be regurgitating something that he swallowed beforehand? I mean, again, I don't want to be casting doubt on the guy either.
No, it's fine.
But it's such a performance I can't separate
The
it out from it
staging.
being a performance. Yeah, in some weird way that it's like, it's crazy to me. It's such a crazy sounding.
It is. It's really hard to wrap your mind around. The only way you can really get it is to experience it. I mean, the magician thing, I mean, for one thing, so Stephen, he's been scrutinized for like decades.
Yeah.
Okay.
He doesn't know anything about technology. He can't even barely work a computer. It's
Okay.
like if this was some trick, it would have been discovered by now. I think I would have figured it out too. I mean,
I see.
Yeah.
I just find it really hard to believe. And I know him so well. I know his circle members. They're circle people. They're people who've sat with him since the beginning in that group.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what kind of trick would allow you to move these trumpets around the room while you're strapped into a chair, and everybody in the group would have to go along with it. What kind of technology can do that? I don't know.
But that's an interesting. Well, there's several. Does he levitate, and does he levitate other objects?
No.
Does he levitate? And he doesn't physically levitate.
He does actually. I mean, I saw once he was levitated always in his chair because he's strapped in, but it was just very low. They were moving him because they were going to do a materialization thing, which I mean, how weird guys want to get. But the
please.
people
Well, we're
in
at
the
the
group,
ectoplasmic rod. so-
The ectoplasmic rods coming out of his navel seems pretty like pushing the trumpet
I
around. Seems
know.
pretty weird. Yeah.
Just to answer the levitation question. So I wasn't there for this event. He actually levitated. His chair was levitated up to the ceiling, right up against the ceiling. And the poor guy woke up there. And he was terrified. He did not like that at all. There's a round table. It's in front of him, which has has the cable ties and has toys on it that the spirit team play with. That's another thing. They ring bells and they bang drumsticks and stuff. And the trumpets are on that table. And so one time I was there, I was just sitting opposite Stuart, and the table was between us. And the whole table just rose up into the air and turned over and landed on its back on the ground. Nobody was touching it, and it was lit up. You could see. It was just nobody was touching that table when that happened. Those kinds of things happen.
Yeah.
It just defies all your perceptions of what reality is. I mean, it's like these are impossible things that happen.
I wonder if I could guide us more towards like the topic of your book. It's related here because one of the things you said is cool. Like why do we just associate the mediumship with communication with the dead? It could be some other kind of spiritual event or phenomenon. And one of the things that I liked about your book on surviving death was it shows you this big difference between being a materialist in your orientation. Like, I'm kind of a Darwinian. I think by and large, consciousness emerged late in evolution. So it's hard for me to think of spirits moving all this stuff around. Whereas if you are a spiritualist, metaphysically, you think that consciousness and the spirits are primary, and the material world is some kind of a manifestation of that, or at least a co-principle with that.
Right.
And so when you tell me these stories, I think if you're a spiritualist, they make more sense than if you're a materialist. And that's one of the things that your whole book was sort of about, was these strange phenomena like near-death experiences and kids that seem to remember past lives. That stuff is fascinating. It's easy to be skeptical about it, but there's also like a lot of data that's emerged on it more recently. What do you think, Paul?
I know that I have over time been able to accommodate the idea of an immaterial world.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think I thought that was the case, and through my teenage years, I've come to now accept the fact that I can't call myself a strict materialist. I definitely believe in things like ghosts, whatever ghost means. That could mean a lot of things, ghost.
Yeah.
And I've had enough weird experiences that I can explain, but some that I can't, that it's allowed me to say, well, there's something immaterial. There's some sort of paranormal, supernatural realm going on. But I still will hit some things and go, there's enough that I can doubt about it. It's very funny to me because I hear this stuff and I'm willing to admit the existence of a lot of things, but for some reason, this stuff I doubt. Whereas I don't doubt a lot.
You mean the ectoplasm?
Well, a lot of mediumship I doubt too, and not just the physical stuff. I have a hard time with a lot of the sort of whatever you'd call it, mental. Would it be mental?
Mental mediumship.
Mental mediumship. The people who can sort of say, I'm getting the name of your father. Those kinds of people.
I have a lot of trouble with that too.
Do you? More so than you do with the physical one?
Well, unless you find a medium that's truly extraordinary, and there aren't that many, but there are some that bring through so much through those mental mediumship types. And there were 2 of them I documented in my book that bring through so much specific information. It's just mind-blowing. But you can't prove like whether they got that from the dead person, which is what they believe and the sitter wants to believe, or whether there's just some ability they have which allows them to access that information.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like you don't know what's behind it, but I mean, it's extraordinary the kind of detail that can come through. And not only the specific details, but the personalities of the people.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. And when I had those readings, I wanted to believe that. I mean, I allowed myself to enter into that space, talking to my brother. And that's what gives meaning to the experience. But then when you reflect back, you can try to analyze it. And
Paul and I also had a reading by a medium, and she's really great. She's a very interesting person. But I felt that even though the information was interesting, it was still in the realm of too vague, too fuzzy for me. But whereas if I did get something really precise, I would find it more compelling.
Absolutely. That's what makes all the difference. Otherwise, it's not evidential, right? You want evidence.
But this is an interesting thing that you said before about sort of the circle of people that this gentleman works with, that he's worked with for years. I was watching some of the documentary series based on your book. And there's an interesting instance of a kind of a guy visiting a medium and it really doesn't work. And the medium says afterwards, well, he wasn't really open to it. And the idea of kind of collaboration between medium and person, see, again, it feels like what happens between an actor and his audience to me. I feel like you ought to be able to do it even if the person isn't giving you much, but I feel like that need to get information back on the part of a medium makes me start to doubt it and makes me start to think that it's a person with an extraordinary level of observation of human behavior and able to read signals about people and maybe not even knowing that you're doing that.
Right.
I mean, I remember Stephen said about this woman we talked to, Teresa Caputo, that he thinks she has an extraordinary gift. It's just not the gift she thinks she has. That her gift is actually one of incredible empathy and an ability to read physical signals in such a way that you can begin to, if you interact with the person collaboratively, create a meaningful event. That may be a great thing in and of itself, and that may be actually the really useful part of it, right? I mean, if that's all that's happening and it's useful for somebody, then that's not a bad thing. I mean, as long as you're not necessarily taking everybody for tons of money or something, but...
Right. That's the thing. I mean, I completely agree with you, and I would say probably 80 to 90% of mediums are exactly what you described. And some of them were, I mean, I've had readings with lots of them were just not, it's just like nothing. And then you hit this one that's just off the charts and something's going on. But I would agree with you, Steve. I mean, Paul and Stephen, most mediums don't have those extraordinary abilities.
Yeah.
They provide comfort to people. There's cold readings, there's whole kind of techniques they can use, but in many occasions, there's just such specific information that comes through that you just don't know what to do with it.
It seems
and that's what happened to me. That's what happened to me. I mean, I was just blown away by it.
I would love nothing more than to actually encounter these things.
I know.
Because I have yet to encounter, I've had weird experiences, but with the mediumship thing, it's the one that I get. And I think it's because there's something that feels familiar to me about an actor or something going on. There's some way in which I can identify something that feels familiar.
Yeah, it's sort of like what you do in a way, in a theater, right?
Yeah, that makes me doubt it a little bit. I know I can convince myself of things so easily. And both as medium and sitter, I can see that you can convince yourself of something going on very easily. And I know how easily I can convince myself or convince somebody else that what is happening in front of them is real. when it's not. And
Yeah.
but I know I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of these people who don't know they're doing it, and some of them who do, who are just full on charlatans, I
Right.
suppose.
No, I hear you. I think that I've got those are all really good insights. Same with physical mediumship. It's a small percentage. I mean, there were tons of hoaxes.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there weren't.
Yep.
But what we care about are the ones that
Yes.
that are the real deal, and but they're not the bigger percentage. Most of them are not going to be at the level of like the ones, the two that I wrote about in Surviving Death in my book.
Well, and that's I want to see. I want to encounter one of these people who is at an extraordinary level, because that I want to see.
And maybe I can help you do that. I mean, unfortunately, one of them has died. That was in my book. The other one is extraordinary. I might be able to get you a reading with her.
Is Stuart Alexander still doing it? Is he still doing these things?
So
okay.
So every week I join the group via computer. It's like a regular part of the highlight of my week.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that just started like before. So I haven't been over there since before COVID. I haven't sat, but I've heard everything. It's like I'm in the room. I just can't see anything if something cool happens.
The impressive thing would be if you could feel the spirit trumpet touching you through the computer.
That would be. That would really be it.
Then I'd be impressed.
You'd never believe me. You'd never talk to me again after that.
Are they working on an experiment for that?
Not,
like a
they're
remote?
What they're trying to do, and there's me and there's another sitter in another location. There's 3 of us in 3 different locations. They try to come into our space,
right,
and see if we can feel them. So that they'll have us like put the music on, and we're just supposed to relax, and then they want us to tell them anything we feel. I might feel some little thing on my shoulder, and I'll tell them. And there's never been anything like super dramatic, like I can feel a hand or something. But I do feel little things sometimes, and then he'll say, "Yeah, that's where we're focusing now." Where do and you give them feedback.
Would we call that astral projection? Is that sort of like,
I don't know what you call
that?
I'll call it that. Let's go with astral projection.
I don't know, but that's starting to make me think of that's like we're getting into like Rand Corporation remote viewing. I don't know what the hell it is.
I don't know what it is.
Shut it all down.
I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know whether it's going to be successful. I mean, I wouldn't say yet that it's really been successful. It's not dramatic enough.
An interesting issue for me is that there's a tradition here, whether it's ectoplasm or sort of like being able to maybe touch your shoulder remotely, that is part of an old tradition about the soul and the spirit, which is there's a kind of breath of life or pneuma or like the ether. Paul and I were talking about this the other day, and it stayed alive and well in the Hermetic tradition, and it had a big influence in folk thinking about the soul and the spirit. But the sort of official teachings, if you look at Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, all the way up to the Pope, is that the soul is immaterial. It's not a stuff at all. It doesn't take up space. It's outside space and time. And so it's just interesting that these are like 2 different traditions.
Yeah, it's weird.
One that can actually interact with the physical world, and the other is it's like outside the physical world somehow. They're just really different.
So there was no place for the element that's outside the physical world to ever interact with it again. It's like was considered impossible.
Right. Originally, I mean, you see this in Hinduism too. Like it's clear in early Hinduism, in the Vedas, that it's a kind of stuff. It's like a rarefied, subtle material, the soul, the Purusha or Atman. And then as you get to the Upanishads, it gets turned more into just like it's more like a number. Or you know what I mean? Like it's totally immaterial. And that happens in that tradition too.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder this too about, does this thing, do either one of you guys know, does this happen in other traditions? Does it happen in in Japanese sort of paranormal world? Do they manifest ectoplasm? Does the same kind of thing happen? Or is it just a sort of, I mean, I'm just curious, do we know?
In Southeast Asia, there's a lot of this kind of stuff.
There is?
Yeah, there's a lot of magical rites and
it's analogous to like ectoplasm and stuff.
Well,
that
I don't know. There I don't know. But there's a belief in spirits that are involved in our daily physical world. It's very strong there. The animism is really strong, and I think the idea of spirits that have died and still are there, ghosts, very strong there too.
Well, I've been more and more convinced that ghosts are everywhere too. But it's funny. I think I'm far more inclined to believe the sort of things where it's measurable with, there's electrical stuff, there's temperature drops, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced those things. So I think that's maybe why I can sort of feel a little bit more open to those things. I'm just curious, and you don't have to answer this. Were you raised with in any religious tradition at all, or with any religion?
No, not at all. I just kind of was always kind of interested, starting in college, really, to just find out what was behind reality, because I practiced Buddhism for many years, starting when I was in college. And, it was like
great.
probing the mind as to what is reality? Who are we, at the deepest level? And then I became really interested in the physical world. Like, what is the unseen? What's the unseen world?
Yeah.
Because these things happen that are not explainable according to the materialist paradigm. So what is this other reality that seems to be there that nobody is willing to acknowledge exists? So I always kind of just wanted to find that out. And I love it when it's physical, because I have this journalistic mind, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's probably more like yours, Stephen, where it's like proof in a certain sense. If you can if it interacts with the physical, it can be documented. It's not subjective. That's the thing about the physical mediumship in Stewart's seance every week. It's like the same things can be shown at a regular time to groups of people that all come in, and they can see the same thing over and over and over again. It's like objective.
Fascinating.
It's witnessable by whoever. And it's like proving that there's this unexplainable reality. We don't know what's going on here, but something's happening. And I love I like to shove that in the face of these diehard
The
skeptics.
squares.
The ones who say, I mean, it's one thing to be skeptical like you are. You're obviously incredibly smart, and you've thought deeply about all these things, and that's terrific. But when you
You're
have
talking
these,
about me, right?
you, yes,
Not me.
Stephen, not this guy. No.
Not me, not the actor.
other guy.
I'll buy
Yeah.
anything. I'll buy
He's
anything.
good at acting, but that's about it. No, I'm just kidding.
Teasing.
You too, Paul. I don't mean to leave you out, but
No. I'm more open than Steve is. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know. But I mean, he's just so obviously thoughtful and open-minded. And when you get these skeptics that are not like that just absolutely say, it can't exist, therefore it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's the dismissive
Even if we
people.
have evidence for it.
Yeah, the people who are dismissive that I find off-putting.
Yeah, I don't like that either.
And they tell me that things that I have personally witnessed don't exist. And I happen
Couldn't
to
be
know
possible.
they do because I've experienced. I mean, as simple a thing as spoon bending and fork bending, which, is a simple,
Basic.
rudimentary thing that people can do. It's just
Yes.
so basic. Or table tipping, all this stuff. They'll
Yeah.
deny that even that doesn't happen. And it does. But yeah, and just having to be able to have this sitting every week. And, so the latest thing that's happening in the seance room is he's being rendered invisible. I don't know how physics can explain that, but so they put the light on in the room, and there's a mist that comes around Stewart's head, which I'm sure is like the misty form of ectoplasm. He becomes invisible from about here up.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
And he's even able to describe what it feels like, because he's sort of semi-conscious. Yeah, I mean, the sitters can see through to what's behind him.
Interesting.
And he's just
Interesting.
gone.
Does he seem like a happy, enlightened person? I'm sort of following, this is really what Paul was asking you, but does this guy who's at such a high level, does he just seem like a Buddha to you? Like
No, he's just like a regular guy.
Regular guy.
neurotic like the rest of us?
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, he's
He
definitely.
might be more neurotic. Yeah.
I guess I can say he's super sensitive, like more neurotic. It does sort of manifest. I mean, I don't think he's ever going to listen to this. I don't know, but he's just kind of very easily anxious about things.
Interesting.
Loses sleep over the littlest things that would not bother most people, that kind of thing. I think it has to do with being really sensitive that all this stuff happens. But he's very clear, and he's been like this from day one, which is kind of unusual, to separate this out from the rest of his life. So he has his 2 hours a week where he's a medium, and the rest of the time he's not a medium. In fact, his own kids didn't even know he did this until they were adults.
Wow.
I mean, he didn't. Some mediums are like, they're mediums all the time, and they run the grocery store, and they'll run into someone's dead grandfather. Or
Yeah.
things happen. Stewart was made it very clear when he walks into the seance room, he's the medium. When he leaves the room, he's not. He's Stewart Alexander.
Oh, that's impressive.
He had
That's
a
cool.
full lifetime career. I mean, he was busy working at a career. He was raising kids. He didn't want anyone to really know he was doing this. He's very private about it. Yeah. So
Do his kids have any seeming ability like this?
think so. I don't think they're really
Interesting.
interested in this. They probably don't really want to have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that being the case. That's interesting. The invisibility thing, I mean, that all does sound like those kind of
So
like
weird.
Tibetan lamas that you would hear about. They could do strange sort of bodily manifestations and stuff like that.
And they could
levitating
levitate.
and yeah, levitating and
If you want to get a sense of him, Stephen, since you just asked, there's some, 2 videos of Stuart on my website. They're long videos, and you can really get a feeling for who he is as a person, just what his energy is.
We could probably talk about this for 6 more hours.
I could talk for hours too.
I'd
So
be
it's,
interested to hear your take on things like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and things like that. I mean, do you entertain?
that'll be brief. It's like
Transition.
That's an easy conversation to
That's
have
an easy
too.
one. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know anything about them because, from day one, I've always been like journalistically focused. Like I'm only going to work with material that is solid enough and provable enough to do reporting on in mainstream media, And so things like Loch Ness Monster, I mean, it was kind of tittillating, but I don't know. I just don't spend time in it. Same with Bigfoot. I'm not saying Bigfoot doesn't exist. I suspect it does.
Okay.
I just don't know
We'll take
because
it.
I haven't looked into it. I mean, I know people that study Bigfoot and it's curiosity to me, but
Yeah.
I can only do so much because the things I do in a lot of depth.
Yes.
Yeah, you are very thorough.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that.
In fact, you're so strenuously journalistically ethical that you can't even tell, like from reading your book, where you stand, which
you
I
stand
think is
about things.
which is a good, I think, a sign of a good journalistic approach. So
Thanks. I try to do it that way. Yeah. And I don't always know either.
Yeah.
I don't really know where I stand on a lot of this.
I don't either with a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
So I want people to make up their own minds, but what I want to do is present the facts and the data as best I can.
Yeah.
And I find there's a lot of convincing data for survival past death, but I'm not saying it proves it. We've opened up a lot of things, but haven't gotten to the bottom of them either. So
everybody should see your books. They should check out your books. It's really,
Yeah, and visit your website too.
Thank you very much,
so
Leslie.
thank you guys.
Leslie Kean, thank you very much.
Great
Thank
to meet you both.
Yes, indeed. Nice to meet you.
Enjoyed every moment of it.
Steve,
Paul,
that was something else.
that was something else.
That was something else. It was more than I even expected it to be.
It was the ectoplasmic rod, I think, is the focal point for me.
Has that become your go-to now?
Yes.
The I'd not heard about an ectoplasmic rod. So to speak, I also wasn't aware. It's interesting to me, the whole idea that it has sort of different manifestations. It's sort of
Yes. I thought it was always a cloud, but it's
which is
apparently-
interesting, which makes it a more intriguing thing to me. I, for one, still need to have firsthand evidence of this. From speaking personally,
The Doubting Thomas.
yeah, I mean, it's like I still, for some reason, and I still can't put my finger on it entirely, why mediumship, both mental and physical, is a thing that I have a hard time with.
That's interesting.
I'm not sure what it is. It is interesting because so much of this stuff,
You're open to so many other things. Why
for Christ's
this?
sake, I'm like, Mothman, sure.
Yeah,
what I
that's true. You got
Mothman, 100%.
Here's where you draw the line. Okay.
Yeah, but I draw the now. You're talking to the dead? No way. I mean, it's funny because of the reincarnation. I mean, we didn't talk to her about a lot of stuff we could have, near-death stuff and reincarnation and things like, all of which I don't have a problem with, even reincarnation.
Oh, really?
I'm way more open to than you might think. But I don't know. What about you? I mean,
Well, there's something about, we've talked about this before, there's something about the sort of carnivalesque magic show quality of the seances that is a bit of a turnoff, for
Yeah.
me as well. And you were saying as an actor, you feel like you've kind of been in these situations where you can draw people in a way, and
Yeah,
people get
yeah,
suckered
I
by
mean-
actors, That's not to say that that's what's happening here, but it makes it a little,
I don't know. There's
feel
something
19th century.
Yeah, there's something funny to me about it still being this kind of left. I don't know. There's something about it feels, I don't know. I don't know that I buy somebody who systematizes this thing. I don't know. Hearing this from her, who's a super smart, super credible
She's a
person,
respected
makes me
journalist.
go, okay, well, I want the firsthand experience of this guy. That's like, so I mean, whether I'll ever get it, I don't know. But it's like, or even the mental mediums too.
Yeah, if you're a pretty, I don't know, say convinced, but you're much more open to ghosts. What's so different about the ghost and this?
I think to me, there's something still too kind of, I think, and again, this is all me being kind of, I mean, my sort of instinctual, imaginative sort of sense of what the spirit world would be like is it's not humanoid. It's sort of alien. It's not
2 arms and 2 legs.
Yeah, it's not hands and like a little trumpet that floats around or something. Although ectoplasm is the bizarreness of that. It actually kind of like, to me, there's something non-human to it. And so even with the mental mediums, there's a part of me that goes, really, is the other world just exactly like this one? And it's like everybody's just sitting there going, oh, by the way, remember when I lost my shoes that time at the beach? And oh, I must be my father I'm talking to. You know what I mean? It just seems so, there's something so banal about it. And maybe it's just that there's not something, and to me it seems like it would be terrifying to make contact with that stuff. Yeah. Like it'd just be this howling mad alien world that who the fuck knows? But I suppose the argument is what's being filtered through is this stuff we can understand, right?
Yeah, if you saw the face of God or the other world, your little mind would be blown. So you get a bourgeoisie version of it.
Well, right. No, and so like a burning bush is the best sort of manifestation of God. That's something you can understand, a voice from, and why, Moses can't see God. He can only see his backside or whatever it is. I mean, it's like you just can't see it.
His backside? What Bible are you reading?
No. It says you can only see his back. It does. It says, I mean, his ass. It just means you can only see him from the back. It's what it says. Right. It's when he's on when he's on Mount Sinai. It said he can't see. He can only see God's. I think it might even say his hinder parts. I think it might say that.
I need to get back to the Bible on this because I believe you. The Bible is weirder than we remember.
Yeah,
for sure.
I don't know. It's just something about it feels too. I'm just like that feels too. Really, is that what we're making contact with?
Yeah,
maybe so.
There's that famous scene in the Bhagavad Gita where the God is like talking to him, but he's dressed himself up sort of as a chariot driver.
Right.
And he's talking to Arjuna, and Arjuna's like, hey, just show me your real nature just once. And he's like, you couldn't handle it.
That's interesting. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's like, listen, the only thing I think you people can handle is a big cloud is the ectoplasmic rod coming out my navel. Maybe so. I don't know what I think about this stuff, but that was amazing. And she's amazing.
Yeah, she's
amazing. Awesome. And I don't know, is there a bonus wag in 2 days away, something like that? Aren't we having that, Steve? Oh.
I believe there is a bonus. Stay tuned.
Bonus wag with your ectoplasmic rod. Uh-oh. That was off color. All right. Well, Steve, as always, a pleasure seeing you.
Indeed, sir. Always a pleasure.
Yep. Wag on. Weirdos.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films, hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Topp, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Jared Brom and Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.